Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? I should have been sitting in class that afternoon, pretending to take notes while my mind wandered, but instead, I slipped out of the back door of the lecture hall and into the city. I told myself it was just one skipped class. Everyone did it sometimes. I deserved a break, a few hours to breathe without fluorescent lights and monotonous voices grinding into my skull. The bus was nearly empty when I boarded, its seats worn down by years of passengers. I slid into one near the middle, next to the window, headphones in but no music playing. I liked watching people without them knowing. The city moved differently when you weren't rushing anywhere. I let the hum of the engine lull me into that detached state where everything feels a little unreal. That's when I noticed him. At first, he looked like any other passenger. Gray coat, thin frame, face gaunt from too many hungry nights. But it was his eyes that cut through the haze. They were hollow, not tired like most commuters, but void, like there was nothing alive in them at all. He sat 2 rows ahead, turned halfway in his seat so he could look directly at me. His lips moved in a faint whisper, though no sound carried over the engine. His stare didn't waver, not when the bus hit a pothole, not when people got on and off. I told myself not to look, that he'd lose interest if I didn't feed it. But every time I shifted my gaze back to the window, I felt the weight of his eyes dragging mine to meet his again. The driver eventually noticed. "Hey buddy, sit forward or get off," he barked through the mirror. The man blinked slowly as though waking from a trance, then rose without a word. He shuffled down the aisle, the smell of damp clothes clinging to him as he passed me. He didn't look at anyone else, only me. His lips moved once more, just inches from my face, though I couldn't make out a single word. Then he was gone, stepping into the street without even glancing at the traffic. The doors hissed shut, the bus lurched forward, and the driver muttered something about lunatics. I should have felt relieved. Instead, my chest tightened with the certainty that this wasn't finished. By the time I got off downtown, the encounter had sunk into the back of my mind like a pebble in water, still there but out of sight. I convinced myself he was just some unstable drifter, someone I'd never see again. People like that came and went, leaving only the memory of discomfort. But when I stepped into the shopping arcade, weaving through the bright lights and the constant buzz of voices, I froze. He was there, leaning against the entrance of a clothing store, his head tilted slightly, lips moving in that same silent whisper. His clothes were the same, but they seemed wetter now, darker, like he'd walked through rain no one else had felt. People streamed around him without so much as a glance, but his eyes locked onto me the instant I noticed him, as though he'd been waiting. I turned sharply and pushed through the crowd, my heart hammering. I didn't stop until I reached the far end of the arcade, panting beneath the glow of a neon sign. When I risked a glance back, he wasn't there. Hours later, back in my apartment, I laughed at myself. Stress, exhaustion, too much caffeine, it all stacked up. Maybe I'd even dozed off on the bus and dreamt half of it. That made more sense than believing some stranger had followed me across the city. The laugh died quickly, because when I stepped into my bedroom, there was something on my desk. A folded scrap of paper. I hadn't left it there. My name was scrawled across the front in shaky, wet ink, and when I opened it, I saw only 3 words, smeared but legible. I found you. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound from the street made my skin crawl. Every shadow seemed to lengthen when I looked away. I checked the locks 3 times, then shoved a chair under the door handle. It didn't matter. Sleep never came. The next morning, my eyes burned, my body heavy from the weight of fatigue, but I forced myself back into routine. Coffee, shower, class. Pretend nothing happened. But even in daylight, I felt him lingering at the edges of my vision, and by evening, he wasn't just in my vision anymore. He was outside my window. 7th floor, no balcony, no ledge, but there he was, face pressed against the glass, lips moving silently, eyes unblinking. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over my chair. The curtains snapped shut in a frantic motion, though I knew that did nothing to erase what I'd seen. My apartment spun around me, the walls closing in. There was no way he could have been there. 7th floor, no ladder, no scaffolding. And yet, I could still feel his stare, like an afterimage burned into my brain. I called a friend, my voice shaky as I made up some excuse about needing company. She laughed it off, said she'd come over later, but by the time she arrived, the window was empty. "You need sleep," she said gently after I confessed part of it. Not the whole story, just enough. "When's the last time you got a full night?" I wanted to believe she was right. I really did. But then she went to grab a glass of water, and I saw the paper again. Another scrap, folded neatly, sitting on the counter where nothing had been minutes ago. She swore she hadn't touched it. This time, the message read, "Don't bring them." The next few days blurred into each other. I couldn't tell when I was awake or when I was dreaming. He appeared everywhere. Reflections in glass, the edge of a crowd, standing in the middle of a crosswalk, while cars drove through him like smoke. His lips never stopped moving, always whispering. I started avoiding people, afraid of what he'd do if I ignored the warning. My friends stopped calling. Professors sent emails I never answered. The world outside my apartment dimmed until it was just me and him. Then, one night, the whisper finally reached me. I woke to the sound of it, not outside my head this time, but inside, sliding through my skull like cold water. Words too fast, too layered to understand, but their meaning sank deeper than language. He wanted me to follow, and I did. I left my apartment barefoot, stumbling into the night air, drawn toward the shape waiting at the far end of the street. He didn't walk, he drifted, leading me block after block, past shuttered shops and darkened houses. My body felt weightless. My thoughts dissolved into the pull of his presence. The city thinned into silence until I stood before a building I'd never seen before. An abandoned tower, its windows black, its entrance yawning like a mouth. He disappeared inside. I followed. The air smelled of rot and wet stone, every step echoing too loud in the hollow structure. I climbed stair after stair, my legs burning, until I reached the top floor. There he was, standing at the center of a wide, empty room, his clothes dripping as though he'd just crawled from a river. His lips moved faster now, and the whisper in my head sharpened into words I couldn't deny. "You're mine now." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body didn't listen. My feet carried me forward, my hands reaching out. His eyes swallowed me whole, and then nothing. Darkness. When I woke, I was back in my bed, sunlight streaming through the window as though nothing had happened. My phone buzzed with missed calls, unread messages. Life wanted me back. But when I turned my head toward the mirror, he was there. Not behind me, not beside me, in me. His hollow eyes stared through my reflection, his lips whispering with mine, until I couldn't tell which of us was speaking anymore. I never thought a simple ride home could change the way I saw the world, but that night, it did. I had stayed late at a friend's apartment after a small gathering. Quiet, nothing wild, just a few drinks and laughter. My dorm was only a few miles away, and I thought ordering a ride would be easy, ordinary, safe. I was wrong. The app said my driver would be there in 3 minutes. I hugged my jacket around myself, shivering in the chilly November air, and watched the streets for the silver sedan he had described. When it arrived, the driver rolled down the window with a smile that was warm but just a little too practiced. "You heading to the dorms?" he asked. I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, that's me." "Good. Front seat is easier. You can stretch a bit. Passenger side's fine." I hesitated but shrugged. I wasn't worried. After all, I'd taken rides before. He seemed polite, professional. I climbed in and buckled my seatbelt, trying not to notice the tight grip he had on the steering wheel, the way his eyes flicked to me in the rearview mirror a little too often. For the first few minutes, conversation flowed normally. Weather, schoolwork, complaints about tuition costs. I relaxed, letting the familiar city streets blur past. But then his tone changed. A subtle shift in the rhythm of his words, the smile never leaving his face but his eyes growing sharper, more focused. "You look different than most students," he said casually, though the words landed with a weight I couldn't ignore. I swallowed. "Oh, just stayed out late with friends. Nothing special." He chuckled softly, and it wasn't friendly. "I like that. People who stay out, who take risks. They're interesting." I nodded, forcing my attention on the passing streetlights. My stomach twisted. Something about the way he said it, the way he leaned slightly closer, made my hands clammy. Minutes passed, and he asked more personal questions. Where I lived, if I lived alone, whether my roommate would be home. I gave vague answers, hoping it would be enough. But then he reached over, lightly brushing my hand resting on my lap. I froze. "Can I hold your hand?" he asked, casual, almost joking. My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to scream, to yank my hand back, but my mouth went dry, and my body betrayed me by staying still. I started, but he didn't wait for an answer. He laid his hand over mine, thumb brushing gently across my knuckles. My mind raced. Why wasn't I doing anything? Why wasn't anyone else noticing? I stared out the window, counting streetlights, praying this nightmare would end soon. My legs trembled, my chest felt tight. "You're quiet," he said after a moment, a hint of amusement in his tone. "I like that. Makes you mysterious." I swallowed hard, nodding, trying to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as it felt. The campus was coming up. Just a few more minutes, I told myself. Just a few more minutes. But then he took a turn down a street I didn't recognize. Is this the way to the dorms?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound casual. He smiled, that same unsettling smile. "This is faster. Trust me." My stomach churned. Something clicked in my head. The realization that I was no longer in control, that I had trusted a stranger blindly. My pulse pounded in my ears. I tried to think, to come up with some excuse, but fear froze me. He leaned slightly closer, eyes fixed on mine in the mirror. "You know, I think I could get used to this," he murmured. I yanked my hand back, clutching my purse tightly, wishing I had kept my phone in my hand instead of the seat. Panic set in, sharp and cold, spreading through my veins. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, but I was trapped in the moving metal box, sliding along streets that didn't make sense. Then finally, a familiar turn. The campus parking lot appeared ahead, lit by street lamps and the distant glow of the dorm building. Relief surged through me, but it was tempered by the lingering terror of his presence. He pulled up beside the entrance. "Here we are," he said, voice casual, like nothing had happened. I scrambled out of the car, trembling, slamming the door behind me. "Thanks," I managed to choke out. He didn't move, just tilted his head slightly. "Maybe I can get your number." "Number I don't give out my number," I said, heart hammering. He smirked, undeterred. "That's okay. The app has it anyway." And then, before I could even process what he meant, he leaned in, pressing a brief, unwanted kiss against the side of my mouth. My chest tightened, my stomach flipped. I stumbled away, running toward the dorm, praying the ground would swallow me whole. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and collapsed against it, shaking. My body shivered, my mind racing. I felt violated, humiliated, and most of all, unsafe in a world that had seemed so ordinary just minutes before. I filed a report with the company, who assured me his account would be suspended. I got ride credits back, polite apologies, and nothing else. But none of that mattered. The terror lingered, lingering every time I got into a car, every time a male driver asked a question, every time I heard a car door close behind me. That ride lasted only minutes, but it haunted me for years. Days turned into weeks, but the memory didn't fade. Every sound, every movement, seemed amplified in my mind. I avoided going out alone at night, took campus shuttles instead of rides, and flinched whenever a stranger smiled at me. The world had shifted, and nothing felt safe anymore. One evening, after a late study session at the library, I decided to take a different route back to my dorm. The campus was nearly empty, lit only by lampposts and the occasional security patrol. My pace quickened as I approached the parking lot. Then I heard it, a car door shutting softly behind me. My stomach flipped. My head snapped back. A silver sedan. The streetlights glinted off the windshield, and for a brief moment, I thought I imagined it. But then the engine rumbled softly, and the driver's side window rolled down. I froze. The same man, his face partially obscured by shadows, his eyes still unsettlingly fixed on me. I tried to convince myself it was someone else, just coincidence, but instinct screamed otherwise. My legs moved on autopilot, carrying me faster, my breaths ragged. He started the car, slowly following, keeping a calculated distance. Panic clawed at my chest. I ducked into a cluster of bushes, pressed against the wall of the nearest building, heart hammering. The car slowed, idling nearby. I could hear the engine, feel its presence like a weight pressing down on me. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I didn't know. Then, without warning, the car rolled away, disappearing into the dark. I didn't breathe until I reached the dorm, fumbled with my keys, and locked the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building, every distant engine sound made my body tense. I kept imagining the brush of his hand on mine, the predatory smile, the taste of fear that lingered like smoke. The days that followed were tense and empty. I avoided rides entirely, walking longer routes, relying on friends to accompany me. Yet even in daylight, I felt the weight of his gaze. Shadows seemed too dark, reflections in windows too sharp. My mind replayed that ride endlessly, each detail etched deeper, sharper. One morning, I stepped out of my dorm to get coffee. I walked briskly, keeping my head down. That's when I felt it, a shadow moving in tandem with mine. I glanced up, a figure across the street, far enough that I thought I might be imagining it, yet unmistakably him. He waved casually, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. The city, once vibrant and full of possibilities, had become a maze of fear. Every stranger could be him. Every ride, every turn, every passing car carried potential danger. I realized the lesson too late. Danger often hides behind everyday moments, and being careful can only protect you so much. It wasn't just a ride, it was a reminder. A small, ordinary moment could spiral into horror, leaving its mark long after the threat itself had vanished. Years later, I still flinch when someone reaches over in a car. I still check the back seat before sliding in, and I still remember the silver sedan, the driver's hand on mine, and the way fear can make the world feel like a trap that's always closing in. I never thought moving to Crestwood would change my life, but it did, and not in the way I'd imagined. The apartment was cheap, worn, and tucked behind a row of aging brick buildings. For someone like me, just out of college with a dead-end office job, it was perfect, quiet, affordable, and away from the chaos of the city. My name's Lucas Hayes, and I was desperate for privacy. The first few weeks were blissful. I settled into my routine, waking early to brew coffee and walk to my job at the small cafe on Maple Street. My neighbors were polite but distant, the kind of people who nodded in the hallways without saying more than necessary. I liked it that way. It felt safe, peaceful, until the stranger appeared. At first it was subtle. I noticed him outside the cafe one evening, just standing near the entrance, tall and thin, with a black coat pulled tight against the autumn chill. He didn't order anything, didn't speak, just watched. At first I thought he was waiting for someone else, maybe another employee or a friend. but his eyes kept finding me. That evening, as I closed the cafe, I saw him again, standing at the edge of the parking lot, shadowed by a flickering streetlight. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he worked late. Maybe he was lost. But the next night, he was back. This time, I noticed the same pale, hollow look in his eyes as he followed me down Elmwood Avenue toward my apartment. My heartbeat picked up, but I tried to stay calm. "It's just coincidence," I whispered to myself, unlocking the front door. But inside, the apartment didn't feel as safe as it had before. Every creak in the floorboards made me flinch. Every gust of wind rattling the old windows sounded like footsteps. For days, I kept my blinds tightly shut. I double-checked locks and bolted doors, yet no matter what I did, I felt him, there, just outside, silent and patient. The first real scare came 2 weeks after I'd moved in. It was around midnight, the apartment dark except for the glow of my laptop. I was scrolling through news articles, trying to distract myself, when the lights flickered. At first, I assumed it was a blown fuse, but then I heard it, a faint scratching at the front door. I froze. My pulse thumped against my ribs as I slowly approached, trying to convince myself it was a stray branch or a raccoon. But then I saw it. Footprints in the thin layer of frost outside my door, fresh and heading straight toward the window. I grabbed my phone, dialed the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. By the time they arrived, the footprints led to nothing. The parking lot was empty, and the street silent. The officers gave me polite smiles, telling me it was probably just some kids messing around, but I knew better. A week later, it escalated. I returned from my evening shift to find the apartment door slightly ajar. My heart sank. I always checked it, always locked it. Inside, nothing seemed out of place, but then I noticed the closet. The door was cracked open. I hadn't left it that way. Slowly, I stepped closer. That's when I saw it. A black coat crumpled on the floor, and on top, an old flip phone. I didn't touch it. My instincts screamed to run, and that's exactly what I did, sprinting barefoot down the hall and pounding on my neighbor's door until she answered. The police traced the phone to a man named Aaron Miles, a previous record of trespassing, no violent charges, but a history of stalking behavior. They assured me he wouldn't come back, that the apartment was secure. But even after the locks were reinforced, even after I installed a small security camera by the front door, the sense of being watched never left me. Every shadow, every passing car, set my nerves on edge. It was late October when I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. The streets were quiet, leaves rustling underfoot. And then I saw him again, standing across the street, just beyond the lamplight, watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I told myself to stay calm, to turn away, but his gaze held me, hollow, patient, calculating. And then he was gone, slipping into the darkness like smoke. I realized then that this wasn't random. He wasn't lost. He wasn't careless. He was waiting for the moment when I'd let my guard down. After that night, I knew I couldn't stay. I needed help, somewhere safe, even if just temporarily. I moved my essentials to my friend Aaron's apartment across town, telling him only that I was having trouble sleeping. I didn't mention the full extent, not yet. But even there, I felt exposed. Phones left on, curtains open, anything could give him a glimpse into my life. A week later, I returned to Crestwood for a quick check. My apartment looked normal from the street, almost welcoming, except I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. That's when I noticed it, an envelope tucked under the door. I froze. No return address, just my name scrawled in tight, almost clinical handwriting. I didn't open it. I dropped it at my feet, backed away, and called the police. Inside, there was a note. "I've been watching. You can't hide." My stomach twisted. Everything I'd feared wasn't imagination. He wasn't some random stranger. He had been inside my apartment, tracking my every movement, my phone, my computer, my daily routines, everything documented, and he wanted me to know he knew. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, the hum of the radiator, the distant barking of a dog, the wind rattling the windows, set me on edge. I left the blinds open slightly, trying to see outside without being seen. Hours passed. The apartment remained still, quiet, too quiet. Then came the knocking. Soft at first, almost hesitant. I held my breath. My heart raced so violently, I thought it might burst through my chest. Knock, knock, knock. Steady, deliberate. I dialed 911, whispering my address into the phone, eyes glued to the front door. But by the time the dispatcher assured me officers were on their way, the sound had stopped. When they arrived, there was no one. No footprints, no car, nothing, just the echo of my fear. Over the next few weeks, I installed cameras inside and outside the apartment. I even considered moving permanently, but work, bills, and the nagging thought that I couldn't let him win kept me there. It was during one late-night check of the cameras that I finally saw him clearly, standing at the edge of the driveway, staring directly into the lens, a piece of paper held in his hand. The words were faint, but readable. Soon, I packed my essentials that night and never returned. I broke my lease, changed my locks, and tried to leave the terror behind. But it wasn't that easy. Every time I passed a quiet street, every time I noticed someone lingering near a doorway, my mind raced. I checked my closets twice before bed, locked every door, triple-checked windows. Every shadow seemed alive. Every whisper of the wind sounded like his voice. Even now, years later, I can't forget him. The stranger who watched me silently, waited for the perfect moment, and reminded me that some monsters don't strike immediately. Some just linger, patient, persistent, and sometimes you don't even realize they're gone. When I bought the little house on Crestwood Lane, I told myself it was exactly what I needed. A quiet neighborhood, wide lawns, the sound of cicadas at night instead of traffic. After years of apartment living, the silence felt like a luxury. I told myself I was finally safe. For the first few weeks, I loved every bit of it. Mornings with coffee on the porch, evenings curled up with a book while the streetlights hummed outside. And the best part, privacy. No neighbors leaning over a shared balcony, no footsteps from the ceiling above. Just me, and the steady creaks of an old house settling. The first time I saw him, I thought I was imagining it. It was a Thursday evening in October. I'd been unpacking boxes all day, and around sunset, I stood by the upstairs window just to stretch my back. That's when I noticed a man at the edge of my driveway. He wasn't walking a dog. He wasn't talking on his phone. He wasn't moving at all. He just stood there, still as a fence post, his hood pulled up, his face shadowed, looking straight at the front of my house. I froze. At first, I told myself he couldn't see me. The lights weren't on upstairs, but something in my gut twisted. He was watching. I don't know how I knew, but I did. He stayed there for maybe 10 seconds, long enough for me to feel the air leave my lungs, long enough for me to wonder if I should call someone. And then, just like that, he turned and walked away, his steps slow and deliberate, until he disappeared around the corner of the street. I let out a shaky laugh. Probably lost, I whispered to myself, though the sound of my own voice felt too loud in the empty house. Still, that night I double-checked the locks before going to bed. The next day, I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe my eyes were tired from unpacking. But 2 nights later, there he was again. This time, I saw him through the glow of my living room window. Same place, same stillness, same hood pulled low. My heart thudded so hard it hurt. I pulled the curtains shut and backed away. My phone was in my hand before I realized it. I typed out a message to my sister, Maria, who lived 2 hours away. Me, there's a guy standing outside. Same spot as last time. Maria, call the cops. Now. Me, he's not doing anything, just standing there. Maria, that is doing something. It's creepy. At least file a report. I told her I'd think about it, but I didn't. Instead, I spent the rest of the night peeking through slits in the curtain, waiting for him to move. Eventually, he did. He walked off into the dark like before, leaving no trace. By then, sleep was out of the question. I stayed awake until dawn, every creak of the house making me flinch. Days passed. I didn't see him. My nerves started to settle. But the feeling, the awful crawling sense that I was being watched, never left. It was the fourth encounter that broke me. It was a Saturday night. I'd ordered takeout, and while I waited, I turned the TV volume low and dozed off on the couch. Sometime around midnight, I woke to a sound outside, gravel crunching under slow, careful footsteps. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The steps stopped just short of the porch. Silence. Then came the faintest scrape, like tape peeling. My breath caught as I realized someone was at the door. I crept forward, heart hammering, and peered through the peephole. The porch was empty. I almost laughed from the flood of relief, until I saw the paper, a note taped to the door. Hands shaking, I pulled it free. 4 words in bold black ink. Claire, answer the door. The fact that he knew my name sent a bolt of ice down my spine. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The police came, but like always, he was gone. They took my statement, wrote things down, promised patrols. Their flashlights swept across my lawn, the beams cutting through the night, but found nothing. One officer muttered something about kids pulling pranks. I knew better. Kids don't stand outside for nights in a row. Kids don't know your name. I barely slept at all. And when I did, I dreamed of knocks at the door, slow and patient, echoing through the walls until I woke in a sweat. The next real knock came 3 nights later. It was just after 3 a.m. The sound was soft, deliberate, like someone rapping their knuckles against the wood with care. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and for a long moment I couldn't even move. The knock came again, then again, steady, calm. I grabbed my phone and whispered into it as I dialed. There's someone knocking on my door. The operator promised officers were on the way. Meanwhile, the knocking slowed, each one separated by long pauses, as if whoever stood outside knew exactly how to stretch my fear into agony. And then, silence. By the time the police arrived, the porch was empty again. That night I realized something awful. The man wasn't going to stop. He wanted me to know he could come whenever he pleased. And that thought was almost worse than the knocking itself. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to sit near the windows. I moved my desk away from the upstairs one, shoved my couch against the living room curtains, and jumped at shadows. The police kept their word about patrols, but deep down I knew it was only temporary. Then, just like that, the sightings stopped. A week passed, then 2, then a month. By Christmas, I began to believe maybe it was over. Maybe whoever he was had gotten bored and moved on. By February, I was almost convinced of it. And then one night, everything came back. It was late. I'd been working in my office, the glow of my laptop the only light in the room. Around midnight, I stretched and looked out the window without thinking. He was there, same hood, same stillness, standing at the end of my driveway, staring up at my window. But this time, he was holding something, a small rectangular object. I ducked away from the window instantly, my heart pounding. I sat on the floor, clutching my phone, too terrified to move. After what felt like hours, I peeked again. He was gone. I told myself I'd dreamed it, hallucinated it, anything but real. But the next morning I found something lodged in the dirt by the mailbox. A photograph of me, taken through my office window. My knees buckled as I stared at it. My desk, my chair, my face lit up by the blue glow of the laptop. He hadn't just been watching. He'd been inside my yard. The police sent a detective this time. He looked grim as he studied the photo. "This isn't random," he said flatly. "Whoever he is, he wants you to know he's watching." They told me to install cameras, so I did. Dozens of them. Every angle of the house covered. For a week, nothing happened. Then one night, An alert jolted me awake. Motion detected in the front yard. I opened the camera feed with shaking hands. There he was, standing at the end of the driveway. His hood tilted back just enough for the lens to catch the pale curve of his mouth. He stared directly into the camera, then slowly lifted a piece of paper. On it, scrawled in thick black ink, were 3 words: "Let me in." I bolted upright, dialing 911 so fast my fingers hurt. When the flashing red and blue lights finally appeared down the road, the feed showed nothing but empty gravel. The detective suggested I stay with family, just until we figure this out. So I did. I packed a bag and stayed at Maria's apartment in the city for over a month. No notes, no knocks, no photographs. When I finally returned, Crestwood Lane felt different, smaller, darker. My house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a stage, and I was trapped under the spotlight. It's been almost a year since then. No more sightings, no more photographs. Life has been quiet, but every night, when I sit at my desk, I still find myself glancing at the end of the driveway. Because the scariest part isn't that he came, it's that I don't know if he's really gone, or if he's just waiting. I never thought a simple hiking trip would drag me into something I can't explain, something I still can't shake no matter how many nights I leave the light on. It started when my best friend Lucas convinced me to spend a weekend up in Pine Hollow. It was the kind of quiet mountain town that existed only on faded maps and half-forgotten road signs. We drove up an old logging trail that twisted through the dense forest, the trees growing darker and taller with every mile. I remember the way Lucas grinned when the cabin came into view, like it was some prize he'd hunted down. It was a weathered thing, leaning slightly to one side, the wood gray with rot. Its windows were smeared with dust, and pine needles clung to the roof like a crown. The place gave me an uneasy feeling right away, though I couldn't explain why. Something about the silence felt wrong. The forest wasn't alive the way it should have been. No birds. No insects, just the whisper of wind pushing between the trees. Inside, the air was stale. The cabin smelled like wet earth and something metallic, almost like rust. Old furniture sat under yellowing sheets, and a stone fireplace gaped wide at the center of the room. On the mantel, there was a single object untouched by dust, a brass lantern. Lucas picked it up, flicking the wick with his thumb. "Cool. Right?" he said. "Bet this thing's older than the cabin itself." I don't know why, but the sight of that lantern made my stomach twist. Something about the way it gleamed in the dim light didn't feel right, like it didn't belong to us. I told him to put it back, but he just laughed. That night, the forest came alive, but not in the way I expected. It started with scratching. I woke to a faint sound at the window. At first I thought it was a branch swaying in the wind, but when I opened my eyes, the glass was bare. The scratching was coming from the inside. I froze, holding my breath as my eyes adjusted to the dark. In the corner of the room, the lantern glowed faintly, though we hadn't lit it. Its brass shell pulsed with a weak orange light like a heartbeat. Lucas stirred beside me, groaning. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He didn't answer, because something else did. From the far side of the room, a low voice rasped, almost human, but not quite. "Let me in." The words were jagged, torn from a throat that hadn't spoken in decades. My skin crawled as I sat frozen in bed. I wanted to believe it was a dream, some leftover scrap of nightmare. But the voice came again, closer this time. Lucas shot upright, wide-eyed. "Who's there?" he snapped, grabbing a flashlight. The beam swept across the room, cutting through shadows. But nothing was there. Nothing except the lantern, glowing brighter now. The flame inside alive, though no one had touched it. "Must be some kind of trick," Lucas muttered, though his voice wavered. He grabbed the lantern, holding it up. The glow pulsed stronger, casting warped shadows across the wooden walls. Then the shadows began to move. They didn't follow the light. They stretched on their own, crawling along the ceiling and across the floor like living things. My throat closed as I clutched the blanket. watching black shapes twist into long, bony figures. Their arms stretched too far, fingers clawing at the edges of the room. The whisper came again, dozens of voices now, overlapping in a chorus that clawed at my ears. "Let us in!" Lucas shouted and dropped the lantern. It hit the wooden floor with a metallic clang, and the flame went out instantly. The shadows shriveled back into nothing. The room was swallowed in silence again, as though nothing had happened. Neither of us slept after that. We sat awake until dawn, too afraid to speak, watching the dead lantern as though it might come alive again. Morning didn't bring comfort. If anything, the daylight made everything worse. The cabin's walls seemed thinner in the sun, as if I could feel every dark thing pressing against the other side. Lucas tried to brush it off, but I could see the way his hand shook when he packed his bag. We decided to leave, but as soon as we stepped outside, something stopped us in our tracks. The forest had changed. The trail we drove in on was gone, swallowed by a dense wall of pine that hadn't been there before. The air smelled sour, heavy with rot. I spun in circles, trying to spot any landmark, but the trees stretched endlessly in every direction, identical and suffocating. Lucas cursed under his breath. "It's fine. We'll just hike until we find the road." But no matter how far we walked, the forest looped back on itself. Hours passed, and somehow we ended up at the cabin again, the lantern sitting on the porch steps like it had been waiting for us. My knees nearly buckled when I saw it. "We didn't leave it there," I whispered. Lucas clenched his jaw, his face pale. "I'm smashing it." Before I could stop him, he grabbed a rock and brought it down hard on the brass shell. The metal dented, but the glass didn't shatter. Instead, the lantern flared to life with a blinding orange glow, and that's when I saw them. Figures gathered in the tree line, dozens of them, their faces pale and eyeless, bodies draped in ragged clothes that shifted like smoke. They stood perfectly still, their heads all tilted in the same unnatural angle. "Run!" I shouted, but the forest swallowed the sound. We bolted back inside the cabin, slamming the door shut. The figures moved closer, their outlines blurring against the trees. Every window glowed with the light of the lantern, casting long shadows inside until the whole room rippled with them. Lucas grabbed my arm. "It wants us," he whispered. "That's what this is. It wants us to light the way." The voices rose again, a storm of whispers crashing against the walls. "Let us in. Let us in." Something inside me broke. I grabbed the lantern and hurled it into the fireplace. The glass finally shattered, spilling shards across the stone. The light went out. Silence. The figures at the windows faded one by one, melting back into the trees until only darkness remained. I collapsed to the floor, shaking so hard my teeth clattered. We didn't sleep. We just waited. And when dawn came again, the forest finally opened, the trail back to town appearing as if it had never been gone. We left the cabin behind without looking back. But here's the thing that keeps me awake now. Last night, I heard it again, the faint scratching at my window. And when I turned my head, there it was, the lantern, sitting on my nightstand, glowing with that same pulsing light. I've learned to live with shadows, but they never leave me. They crawl just beyond the corners of my vision, always stretching, always reminding me of what happened that summer. My name is Aaron Winslow, and though years have passed, the memory of him, the man in the crooked uniform, still feels as raw as the night it began. Back then, I was 17, restless, and bored in Stonebrook, the kind of town where nothing ever seemed to happen. People left their doors unlocked. Neighbors brought casseroles when someone sneezed too hard. My best friend Maris lived next door, and our families were so close we may as well have shared one backyard. On sweltering July evenings, we'd sprawl out on the grass and talk about nothing, waiting for something, anything to break the stillness. That night, something did. I was barefoot in my backyard, blades of grass sticky with the day's heat, when I heard the crunch of tires in the Davenport driveway. I thought it was Maris's mom returning from work. I hopped onto the fence, ready to call out and ask if we were still going to the mall later. But the car wasn't theirs. It was an older silver sedan, dull paint reflecting the streetlight in warped patches, dents along the side door like scars. The air seemed to thicken as I watched it roll to a stop. A man stepped out. At first glance, he wore a police uniform, but something was off. His shirt looked faded, like it had been washed 100 times too many. The patches on the sleeves stitched crooked, uneven. He didn't have the heavy belt I'd seen deputies wear, just a taser clutched loose in his hand. He walked to the Davenport's front door and knocked 3 times. Hard, precise. I crouched low, my pulse hammering. Something about him felt wrong, too stiff, too deliberate. I pressed my eye to a knothole in the fence, watching as he leaned forward and peered through their front window. Seconds ticked by before he turned, walked calmly back to his car, and slipped inside. The sedan didn't leave. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and texted Maris and her dad. "Some guy in a fake cop uniform at your door, holding a taser. Do you know him?" By the time Mr. Davenport pulled into the driveway 10 minutes later, the silver car was gone. But I'll never forget the way that man moved, as though being seen was part of his plan, not a mistake. When I showed Mr. Davenport the knothole where I'd watched, he pulled up his phone. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen toward me. Their doorbell cam had caught him. The same wrinkled uniform, the same taser, the same blank, unblinking face. A deputy came by later. He listened, took notes, but his explanation felt thin. Even if he was serving papers, nobody does it dressed like that. And we don't have unmarked sedans in this county. Whoever he wasn't one of us. That should have ended it. Just a scare. A strange man, gone before we could make sense of him. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't over. 2 weeks later, my parents and I left for a long-planned trip to Ardon Bay, a resort town by the coast. I thought distance would help me forget. The moment we arrived, I almost believed it. Towering white hotels, palm trees swaying in neat rows, music drifting from the beach. The place was so polished it felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's postcard life. For the first few days, I let myself breathe. I laughed, I swam. I pretended the man in the crooked uniform was just a trick of memory. But one evening shattered that illusion. We had just finished dinner, and my parents wanted to browse the stalls along the beach. As we crossed the lobby, I realized I'd left my jacket in the room. They told me to grab it and meet them outside. I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The doors were closing when a hand shot out, forcing them open. He stepped inside. The uniform was gone. He wore only a dark shirt and jeans. But I knew him. Those sharp cheekbones, those flat, unfeeling eyes. The way his lips pressed tight like a secret he'd never share. My body locked up. My throat went dry. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, a look-alike. But when the doors slid open on my floor, I stepped out, and so did he. The hallway stretched long and empty, the carpet muffling my steps, his falling just behind, a beat slower. I quickened my pace. He did too. Something primal surged through me, screaming one word: run. I sprinted. My keycard shook in my hand as I fumbled at the door. Somehow it worked, and I slammed it shut behind me. Silence. Then the hotel phone rang. I picked it up with trembling fingers. "Hello," I whispered. "You're beautiful," a man's voice said, low and calm. Ice spread through me. "I saw you," he continued. "Walking, running. I like the way you move." I slammed the phone down. Seconds later, it rang again and again. Each time his voice grew darker, until finally he said words that hollowed me out completely. "I know what room you're in, Aaron. Don't hide from me." Hearing my name from his lips broke something inside me. I curled up against the wall, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. By the time my parents returned, I was still a wreck. My dad answered the next call himself, roaring into the phone. The line went dead. The hotel staff brushed it off as a prank, insisting it was just another guest. But I knew better. It was him, the man at the fence, the man in the elevator, and he wasn't finished. The rest of that trip was a blur of fear. I refused to leave the hotel room alone. I skipped the pool, the shops, the beach. Every hallway felt like it was watching me. Every phone ring made my stomach twist. My parents tried to convince me it was just some sick prank, but I saw the doubt in their eyes. They knew I believed it was real. When we finally drove back home to Stonebrook, I thought the distance would cut the cord, that the man belonged to the resort, or to that one strange night, not to me. But a week after we returned, Maris texted me late at night. I think I saw that silver car, parked at the end of our road, lights off. When my dad came outside, it drove away. I stared at the message until my hands went numb. The days that followed became a ritual of fear. I checked locks 3 times before bed. I kept curtains drawn. Every time a phone rang, I froze, waiting for silence or a voice that shouldn't know my name. Sometimes when I walked home after dark, I felt a pressure at my back, like eyes carving into me from the shadows. But he never came to the door again, never called my name out loud. And in a way, that made it worse, because he was still out there, watching. Years passed. I moved away after high school, trading Stonebrook's stillness for the constant noise of the city. At first I thought the chaos would protect me. Too many people, too many lights, too much motion for a single shadow to follow. But the habits I picked up that summer never left. I avoid elevators whenever I can. Hotel hallways make my stomach knot. I never walk to my car at night without scanning the garage for reflections of dull silver. Most people see concrete and parked vehicles. I see hiding spots. The thing is, I never saw him again. Not clearly, not close. But sometimes the world goes quiet enough for me to feel him. One night after working late, I stepped into the parking garage beneath my office. It was empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. My footsteps echoed as I walked to my car. Then, from behind me, another set of steps. I froze. The sound stopped too. My keys trembled in my grip as I turned, scanning the rows. Nothing, just cars and shadows. But the silence was too heavy, as if someone held their breath just out of sight. I slid into my car, locked the doors, and drove away with my pulse hammering. In the rearview mirror, for a split second, I thought I saw headlights switch on from the far end of the garage. Another time I came home to find my apartment phone ringing. When I answered, the line was dead. Just silence. No static. No accidental pocket dial. Silence, held like a breath, stretched out until I hung up. And sometimes, in dreams that feel more like memories, I hear his voice again. Calm, steady, unhurried. I like the way you move. I wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, the words crawling across my skin. Friends tell me I should see someone about it, that trauma doesn't vanish on its own. Maybe they're right. But the problem isn't just inside me. The problem is knowing he's still out there. Because every so often, the world reminds me. A few months ago, I was walking home from a late dinner. The streets were quiet, empty except for the neon glow of a corner store across the road. A silver sedan rolled past me, slow, almost crawling. My chest tightened. The driver's face was just a shadow behind the glass. But the way the car moved, steady, unhurried, patient, made my stomach turn to ice. I told myself it was just coincidence, just another car. But as I unlocked my building's front door, I glanced back. The sedan was parked half a block down, engine idling, lights off, watching. I hurried inside, heart pounding, and didn't look out the window again that night. That's how it always happens. Brief glimpses. Cars that vanish when I try to follow. Calls that hang up when someone else answers. Steps that stop when I turn around. Always enough to keep me wondering. Never enough to prove he's real. And maybe that's the cruelest part. I don't know his name. I don't know what he wanted. I don't even know why he chose me. But I know he hasn't forgotten. When the phone rings in the middle of the night and silence stretches through the line, I imagine him sitting somewhere dark, the phone pressed to his lips, smiling that tight, joyless smile, reminding me. And I wonder, if he waited years just to remind me once, how long will he wait to finish what he started?